share. Okay. So like I said, my name is Samantha. I'm the Senior Program and Compliance Officer, and I'm super excited about this presentation because I just feel like we can't talk about these systems enough, and they are our official grant records. So it's super important that everyone understands exactly what they do, how they do or don't interact. Secrets, they don't interact. And this is an opportunity for everyone who has been part of the AmeriCorps portfolio before to kind of, I think, speak up about what works, what doesn't work with the system. There are a lot of new people on here who haven't used some of the criminal history check systems. And so if we can provide support as a community to everybody in different kind of ways, I think that will just be successful as a community, as a portfolio. So eGrants and OnCorps and others, oh my. This is our agenda. We're going to go through eGrants, OnCorps, TrueScreen, Field Print. We're going to talk about troubleshooting if you have issues, and then I'm going to give you some resources to utilize these systems. And if I'm going too fast, let me know, and feel free to interrupt me. So, like I said, these electronic systems are systems of record. So the AmeriCorps program is giving us a grant, and we have to document the ways that we utilize that grant. Usually, there's planning grants on here who are planning their programs, but usually a lot of your grant is going towards your member living allowances. So there's a lot of different systems that are supporting the members. Our commission utilizes a number of electronic systems. Other commissions, other states do as well. And we want to break it down by each system so you understand exactly what they do, what they don't do, what their capacities are, and then how do we document that, we've utilized them. So we're going to talk about eGrants, OnCorps, TrueScreen, Field Print. TrueScreen and Field Print are national service criminal history check systems. And then eGrants, hopefully all of you are semi-familiar with that because that's where you submitted your application. And then OnCorps is a record keeping system. At the bottom here, these systems do not talk to each other. If you're doing one thing and you think that it's covered in others, it doesn't. It's not. Anything that you need to do for a member, you need to do in these counts individually. So they don't talk to each other. So just remember that. Keep that in mind. The first one is eGrants. So what does eGrants do exactly? It's an online system designated to streamline recruitment, enrollment, member management. So like I said, planning grants don't have members. So this is, something that you'll get into within the next year, but you submit your application through eGrants. Some of you, we start with EVA, an online platform that our procurement office uses, but ultimately your application to the AmeriCorps agency and our application to the AmeriCorps agency goes through eGrants. For those of you who are a little bit more seasoned, you've probably heard that AmeriCorps is going through a modernization process where they're using, they're going to get rid of eGrants in the future, which is great for us, but that means we have to learn a whole new system. But for right now, for the next year, we're going to be using eGrants. So you're creating your service opportunities so your members can apply or you can invite them to apply. You're recruiting through this mechanism, through eGrants. I know the different programs recruit different ways, so not everybody utilizes the service opportunities or the recruitment work basket. So you might be recruiting outside of eGrants, but ultimately your members have to be in the eGrant system in order for them to get their education award. So you're enrolling and placing members. There's different ways to do that. You're creating and approving slot changes. So if you have X number of slots, you want to do a slot conversion, which we're not going to get into, you can do that through this system. You're exiting members. So they get their education award. You're saying, yes, they completed their service on time. And here's, the official form to exit them throughout the system. And that triggers the AmeriCorps, the trust to give them their education award. And then provides member and program oversight. So performance reports. So, and we'll look at that, maybe not today, but when we talk about monitoring in the next couple of days, we'll talk about the different reports that are available. But essentially anything that you can do and see, we can see because we're the prime. So if you have a question about eGrants, you can usually come to one of the staff and we can see what you're looking at because your application has gone through us to the agency. So we'll see probably a little bit more than you can see, but essentially our systems are pretty much the same. It's a very antiquated system. I didn't create it, but necessary evil. So here's a screenshot of what eGrants looks like. And if you submit your application or had anything to do with it, you would have seen this as a front page. Excuse me. So at the bottom, creating an application, new continuation amendment. Concept papers are for Vista, for AmeriCorps Vista. Managing your account. So commission input on national applicants, you wouldn't see that, but there's a whole bunch of different ways and things that are available to you based on your organization's history with AmeriCorps, and maybe not just have going through the state commission. If your organization has received any kind of AmeriCorps assistance in the past, your grants are going to be archived and view all. Usually you're going to Portal Home where you're viewing your AmeriCorps portal, and here's where all your actions are. So here on the right-hand side, I probably have a little bit more than you may. We have a Vista program, so that kind of stuff shows up here. But if your organization, I think a couple organizations may have a Vista program, so it might look similar. But you're managing your programs, you're managing events, you're inviting members, managing members. Here down at the bottom, you can see where it says, where it's highlighted, S&N, that stands for State and National Work Basket, State and National Reports. So that's usually where your member stuff is going to be. And then you're going to run reports based on, your enrollment, your cycle of enrollment. So if you have 8 days to enroll members and 30 days to exit them, you can see that. You can also see if everyone's criminal, eligibility is, so you can also run reports based on if their citizenship status and their social security status is complete, without going into each individual member to make sure. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do. And I will tell you, I'm a Vista alum, and then I've had over 10 years in national service. There's some stuff in eGrants I don't know, but the way that I know what I know is just by clicking around. I mean, honestly, so some of this stuff, unless you save it, you're not going to hurt it. I promise you. And then we can probably usually undo what you did. So who has access to eGrants? Your authorized representative should have an account. No one should be sharing accounts. That's a huge no-no. So staff who are doing immediate recruitment for your organization, let me back up real quick. I know that a lot of times your authorized representative is not have an eGrants account, and we've kind of gone back and forth with who has access to your eGrants account, who's actually submitting your application. Moving forward, we will probably bring the hammer down, so to say, more on that, because we're interested in, does your organization or whoever is submitting your application have the right to enter you into a contract? And while there's a DSS contract, there's also, you're submitting an AmeriCorps application that says we are committing to this program, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So your authorized representative, whoever has, the ability to enter you into a contract, should be submitting that application. It shouldn't just be the program director. So staff who do immediate recruitment, you'll want to be a recruiter in eGrants, so you can look at the applications, you can vet them, you can go through them, and then staff who enroll and exit members. And there's a whole bunch of different organizations on this call and that will meet over the next 2 days and next week that have different structures. So the person who's doing recruitment may not always be the person who's doing the enrollment and exiting. I would definitely look at who does what in your organization and the separation of duties, because I've seen programs that haven't exited members. What was it? It was 10 years ago, they still had a member in service. They had or there was definitely somebody who hadn't been exited in 190 days. And it's that kind of stuff just slips through the cracks. So just having checks and balances and knowing who has access to your eGrants account. Common pitfalls, like I said, the programs, and we'll get into OnCorps in a minute, but they don't talk to each other. So if you're only putting all your information in OnCorps, then you're not enrolling your members in eGrants. They're not going to get their education award. So the AmeriCorps system is really the AmeriCorps Education Award. It triggers, it's an official grant record for them. So not enrolling members on time. So I said 8 days or exiting 8 days or 30 days, excuse me. Converting slots before final approval. this happens all the time, and then your MSY gets kind of mixed up, and some people might not know what I'm talking about, but just keep in mind this PowerPoint is available after training for you to look back at. And then not running your state and national reports to self-audit. You never want to wait, and I know that a lot of organizations here, work with different grants as well, and you never want to wait until it's monitoring time to know where you stand and what your potential deficiencies are. So anybody who's used eGrants, this is the participation slide. Any useful tips, tricks, tools, you can also complain, that's fine. Anybody want to speak up and talk about eGrants and their experience, or? I'm okay in silence too.
I'll just second what you said, Samantha, about poking around. I managed a Vista grant for a while, and I learned to just like calm down and poke around, and eventually you'll find it in a place that doesn't maybe make intuitive sense to you.
100%. Thank you, Melanie. Perfect. I love that. Okay, let's move on to OnCorps. So OnCorps is essentially our reporting tool or online report. It's an online system. So it's designated to track member timesheets. So members need a certain number of hours to get their education award. You submitted performance measures with your application in eGrants, and this is where we track them. In OnCorps, this is where we do the reporting. And then expense reports. So you also submitted a budget, right, in eGrants with your application. And here in OnCorps is where we're tracking your expenditures. So tracking member time, your organization, excuse me, is ultimately going to set up your timesheet. And so different organizations do it differently. Planning grants, you will do that this year, but you will still be using OnCorps for your expenses. So approving member time, supervisor and director, and Sasha will get more into that, I think, tomorrow when we talk about timesheets. Reporting on approved performance measures. So each year, for older programs or programs that have been in the portfolio, what we do is we copy all of your records and then put them over to the next year. So you can click what you want to keep, and then you can get rid of what you don't want to. So sometimes members are serving in multiple years. You can copy them over to the next year. Sometimes you're using the same exact performance measures. You can copy those over to the next year. But what happens is your program officer is going to go into OnCorps, and they're going to look at your approved application, and they're going to look at OnCorps, and they're going to make sure that what you put in as your performance measure matches what you put in OnCorps. Because like I said, these systems don't talk to each other. So a lot of the stuff we're doing manually, unfortunately. So then each quarter, you report on your progress. So yes, we've served X number of students, and this is, the impact, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're going to report on your monthly expenses. Unfortunately, right now we don't have a fiscal officer, so we are not really going to get into the weeds. However, when these trainings and these slideshows go out, Shannon, our fiscal officer who just left, did do, and we have recordings of how to input your budget, how to request your expenses. And then we also have On3 Learns, which is a paid subscription that talks about fiscal aspects and doing your budget. So this is OnCorps is where you are going to put all of your expenses. Right now, there is a place for you to attach like your backup documentation, but at this point in time, we just ask for what your expenses are, so the numbers. I'm not sure if anybody on here on this call specifically does PERs or periodic expense reports, but it's just a function of OnCorps. So here's what it looks like. The commission doesn't really have a lot of, rules or policies about OnCorps. There's a way to, OnCorps has a lot of possibilities. You can upload MSAs to there. You can upload position descriptions. The member file is pretty intricate if you want to keep information there, like emergency contacts. I think they have a new DocuSign feature that you can hook up to OnCorps. So if your organization doesn't have that already, it might be a paid subscription, so we'd have to look into that. CLC reporting. My front screen is going to look a little bit different than yours, and that's only because you as the user can decide what's on your front page. So you can put reminders like my PER is due the 10th of the month. You can say, the GPR is due the 10th of the month. So there's just reminders that you can attach to the front screen of your OnCorps, or you want timesheets to pop up every time they're submitted to you. Those can go on the front page as well. I don't approve any time, so you don't see that one here. So you just see some uplifting quotes from Barack Obama, which I think everybody sees when they log in. So reporting is up here for GPRs. So right, select notification, that's where you do it. Financials, which is your PER, time tracking, which is your members. And then you can do a calendar. Help is really important. They have tons and tons and tons of tutorials. They have recordings. They have FAQs. They have step-by-step instructions. Very, very helpful. I will also say, you'll see at the bottom here, last training last year, Shannon and I did a screen recording of different places to go in eGrants and OnCorps. So if you want to watch that, you're feel free to do that. Like Melody said, OnCorps is another one of those where you just like click around, and it might not be super intuitive, but it's what we got. So, but the commission only uses, I think, 3/4 or a half of what it's capable of doing. But we'll outlay that for you if you don't necessarily know what you need to do, but we'll make sure you have the tools you need. Who has access? So the program director, whoever that program director is, you have ultimate access. And then the program director of each program. So we give each program a portal. And the program director creates supervisor accounts, they create member accounts, and then you have access to that. So I will say this is what happens all the time. And I would think about this, the commission needs to think about this. When people leave, we need to deactivate their access, right? Like OnCorps and eGrants have PII, personal identifiable information, and regardless of whether someone leaves on good terms or not, they need to be deactivated in the system. So many times I'll see program directors who are still active and still have their passwords active, years after they left. So we just need to be cognizant that the right people have the right access, because it has member information in there, and it's tracking their time for their education awards. So it's a grant record, is what I'm trying to say. So common pitfalls of OnCorps. So only enrolling members in OnCorps, they need to match eGrants, same like that, like I said before. Setting up timesheets, that can be a common pitfall if you're not setting them up correctly based on your pay schedule. Timely submission of reports. This happens across the board. Members aren't submitting timesheets on time. Your program isn't submitting your periodic expense report on time. We just need to be cognizant that whatever is happening in OnCorps, ultimately we're setting those deadlines so we can report to AmeriCorps, the federal agency. And then not disabling access during staff turnover. So any useful tips, tricks, tools when using OnCorps? This is a crowd participation. Does anyone not like OnCorps? Anyone find it hard to use? Anyone? Oh, Andrea, I saw you. Yeah, there you go.
I feel like OnCorps is way easier than eGrants, so that's a pro. Yeah, I mean, I think again, like just using the menus, and then we started taking screenshots of like, here's where you find this, that we just have in a shared document on our team. Like, hey, the GPR is under this tab. And that's really helpful, especially when people are new. But yeah, much easier than eGrants. So once you get used to it, it feels a lot better.
Big ol' win. Big ol' win. Yeah, it's a great idea. Taking screenshots and yeah, sharing amongst your team. That's great. Yeah. Especially if you have a bigger team and people have different access and different parts of what you need. That's great. All right, let's keep moving. True screen. So the next part, the next two sections, planning grants, just bear with us. This is going to be your first kind of, orientation to the criminal history check stuff. And planning grants don't have to do criminal history checks for their staff because they don't have members, but let's keep moving. So TrueScreen, approved vendor for completing the required NSOPW and state checks, National Sex Offender Public Website check. So we will talk about criminal history checks, I think, either tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday, excuse me. And we'll get into the how, why, when, where, whoever. But you have to do check, you do 3 checks: a name-based check, a state of service or state of work check, and then a fingerprint, FBI fingerprint check. So TruScreen is the name-based check. So you have to spell someone's name correctly or else it's not compliant. You have to adjudicate, and what adjudicate means, excuse me, is make a final determination that this person's eligible to work or serve in your program. We will get into all the nitty gritty about the CFR and the eligibility criteria, but it's just a system that lets you, instead of, we used to have to go directly to the NSOPW, the National Sex Offender Public website, and then make sure every single state was reporting, print it out, sign it. And then we had to also then go to the Virginia State Police, and those checks were taking forever. And then if your member is residing outside of the state, then you have to go to their repository and get the state checks from wherever. Let's say they're in Maryland. So that was crazy. So now that they've used this approved vendor, TruScreen, AmeriCorps, across commissions and across their own programs to do those checks. So here's a little bit of what it looks like. I have more screenshots in the criminal history check training, and there's tons and tons of resources on Litmus. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'm getting, a lot of screenshots are from Litmus, which is the training knowledge network from AmeriCorps. But this is essentially what it looks like. And you'll see you have to adjudicate at the bottom. It gives you a whole bunch of things. If it's the pass review, or if they don't pass, they don't give you a rap sheet. So if someone doesn't pass, there's ways that they can challenge it. Doesn't mean they're not eligible to serve, but anyway, this is just a very brief thing of what it looks like. And when they, this is a little tidbit. When they first came out with these vendors, I think it was 4 years ago when I first started with the commission, I was like, oh my gosh, adjudicate, adjudicate, adjudicate. So I got a tattoo that says adjudicate. So I joked, I was like, I'm gonna get it on my forehead because, you know, adjudicating is just such an important part of the process. So when I was in West Virginia at a national service conference, I got that tattoo. Anyway, that's how important it is. I tattooed it on my body. So who has access to TruScreen? Staff in charge of running your criminal history checks. Each year, at the beginning of the year, we give you the template, the updated template for National Service Criminal History checks, and your template is going to name who does the checks that you take in the Litmus, which you can take every calendar year, and then any additional checks that you do at your organization, because some organizations also run a different background check, or they'll do a drug test, or their schools have to do a test. So in addition to what we require in order to serve in AmeriCorps, based on these contracts of TruScreen and FieldPrint, you have to run them, end dot period. And then any additional checks that you do, and then are there criteria that would disallow someone from serving in your program? So the only eligibility requirements, excuse me, for someone serving in AmeriCorps is that they're not a sex offender or required to be on the sex offense list. They're not a murderer, and they don't lie about their criminal history when they're in their applications process. So if you're a school-based program, do you do the CPS check? Is there additional requirements or something that would disqualify someone from serving in your program? Any other thing? And then adding people to TruScreen is just done through email, and that's I'll talk about that in our resources page. Common pitfalls with TruScreen: if you don't spell the name right, it's non-compliant. Like, you just have to spell their name right, and that's difficult sometimes because in the past it was using government issued photo ID, and I've had issues with programs talking about, like, there's a space in between their middle name and their last name. Is there a space? You know, sometimes different licenses do it differently. So now you have to determine in your policy, how are you determining what their legal name is? Are you doing it based on their AmeriCorps application? Are you doing it based off their license, off their passport, off their birth certificate? So in your policy, you're determining what is their legal name, and then you have to use that legal name in the search. Very important. Not running applicable state checks. So Virginia is actually not available in TruScreen right now. I don't know why, but they do report to the FBI, so that's why we do multiple checks. So when you're doing a run in TruScreen, unless they're out of state and you determine at application what state they're residing in, you're not going to run a Virginia check. You're just going to run an NSPW. And then not adjudicating. Huge pitfall. You will get a disallowance It is costly. It is awful for everybody involved. A lot of paperwork. So please just adjudicate your checks. All right. Anybody who's used TrueScreen, easy, difficult, hate it, love it, indifferent? Has anyone used it?
I just know I haven't used it personally, but we send our checks to our HR. And I know that if you have, say if they have like 3 names and you don't put the middle name is actually the middle name. So I make sure I ask my students like, well, I need your first name. If it's Anne Marie and then you have a middle, is Anne the first name, Marie the middle name? And like, I make sure that they're very specific because it comes back if it's in the wrong category. At first I was assuming what I thought it was, and then they started coming back. I was like, oh, not assuming anymore. And so it is true what they say about assuming. So
I really appreciate that, Joy. That is, I can't, the number of conversations I've had about that in the first 2 years when I was at the commission about the middle name and is it part of the first name? And it's like, oh my gosh, it's so crazy. So you're right, asking and being specific, just super important. It's a minute detail, but in the long run, it goes, without saying. I really appreciate
and
that.
when you're doing 150 at a time, it is a nightmare. Just I'll tell you that.
Right on, right on. The struggle is real. Anybody else before I move on to field print? Field print. So it's an approved vendor to run mandatory FBI fingerprint based checks. It's fingerprint. If you spell their name wrong on their what do you call it? When you're scheduling them, it's not the end of the world because it's fingerprint based. It's not name based. I don't encourage that. Don't spell anyone's name wrong, but it's not the end of the world. So it schedules member or applicable staff checks at live scan locations. There's a whole bunch here in Richmond, and depending on where you are, there may be 1 or 2. If you ever have a hard time finding a live scan, contact the commission and we'll work it out. You can order like fingerprint cards. It takes forever, but there's ways around everything. So it emails you an adjudication recommendation based on the AmeriCorps criteria, which I went over, which is, you can't be on a sex offender list, can't lie about your criminal history, and you can't have murdered anybody. But sometimes it'll come back because, so we're going through a very specific account. So like the CNCS field print, it's not just regular field print. They have their own account. They have their own contract with field print because it screens people based on those 3 criteria. So, but sometimes this is what happens, that someone has maybe a violent crime in their background and it'll flag that and it'll come back and say, this could be murder. It's not exactly murder, but in that state, whatever state it was in, it could qualify as part of whatever. So in that instance, they're not eligible to work or serve, but they have to challenge it and then they have to give you the actual results and they have to prove to you, so you don't have to do anything else. They have to prove to you that it's not murder and that they're eligible to serve. So there's a whole bunch of different, and it's all in the handbook. So I can't force anybody to read a handbook or a manual, but I would definitely say it's worth it just to at least scan it. Because all these things will probably come up if you've been in the program for as long as some of these programs have. So access to My Fitness Determination, which is where it tells you, the system will tell you whether it's a cleared or not cleared recommendation, and then access to My Fingerprints, which is where you put your final grantee adjudication. Like I said, you guys are going to put together a policy that says this is what our organization, aside from TrueScreen and field print, this is what we want in an eligible candidate. So based on your own outside criteria, plus the determination by field print and TrueScreen, you're going to finally adjudicate them and say, yes, this person is cleared for service. So who has access? So staff who are in charge of running your criminal history checks. The system and the manual says if you guys could have at least 2 users to prevent access barriers, this is what happens. This is what happened at a program when I first got here. The person left who had the account and then trying to get the specific account related to that organization to have access, somebody who new came in, have access to their account, because specific account that you're signing up for. You are going into like a contractual agreement with FieldPrint, and then you're giving them information based on your organization. So if someone leaves and their email's not in use anymore, that's going to be really tough to get access to that account. And the add users, we'll talk about that in resources. So only using the fitness determination to view cleared or not cleared, so not making the final adjudication is a common pitfall. No adjudication of results, and then members missing appointments. I think if you miss the appointment, it costs like $28. And as an organization, I would not want to take that on if someone misses there. And plus, it doesn't really speak well to their, membership. Anybody have any useful tips or tricks, or has had trouble with FieldPrint before or used it before? I know that they've gone through different iterations, but they used to not be able to adjudicate within the system, and you had to print out the results and sign it and date it. And now they've added like all these helpful features. But I wasn't sure if anybody's used it before or found it not useful or. All right, there's a lot of stuff. I know, I get it. Oh, Alexandra, how's it going?
Hi, Samantha. I'm here. For the starters FieldPrint, my experience has been, I like the fact that I can see as a site manager that the person has their fingerprints stuff scheduled. But I do personally, I do wish it was a little bit more user-friendly in the sense of like, oh, the adjudication process, like that system definitely is a little bit outdated in my personal opinion, but it's nice to see that, especially for me as a manager, it's nice to see that like I see the candidate on it with their schedules and the results. So I mean, every program has its flaws, so but for the most part, that would be my only feedback about it. Mm-hmm.
That's fair. Yeah, not every system's perfect, right? Because we're all imperfect. But I would say, with TrueScreen FieldPrint, and I've seen this with every program, when I do an audit or a monitoring, people are printing results out, but you don't need to do that. Like if you print out, there's a whole list of things that you need to print out, like their consent to undergo a criminal history check, that they've, done X, Y, and Z. They haven't lied about their criminal history. If you print out one thing, like the result, you have to print out everything. So we are adjudicating within the system. If you want to have a backup for FieldPrint, because it has been a little weird over the past two years, you can print out the result and sign it and date it. But all the adjudication is held within the system. And when we talk about criminal history checks, I'll show you how to run a report, and you can see that it's adjudicated, just so you do your own check. But thank you, Alessandra. I appreciate that. So troubleshooting. So what do I do if I'm having issues? Always, to Kathy saying in the beginning, inform your program officer. Sometimes we can just like go in and like if we see a problem, or if you send us a screenshot, I mean, there's 1,000 different things that happen every single day. So we may have come into contact or come across that issue before. I will say the help desk with AmeriCorps sometimes depends on their backload and what time of year it is. They can be kind of overloaded and you might not get an immediate answer. I have found, and I'll talk about this later, probably tomorrow, about if the commission fills out a help desk request, I feel like we get a faster response. It's just been my experience. So if you need something escalated, I would, let us come to us immediately. OnCorps, like I said, they have awesome FAQ tutorials. TrueScreen, Michael Carnation is the person who basically does everything and routes everything. He's amazing. And then FieldPrint has their own customer service email there as well. So just let us know and we can point you in the right direction. We have all this stuff that I just talked about and how to add users is on our resource portal for Basecamp. New programs and planning grants might not have access to this yet, so we'll make sure you get access. And here I just opened this portal, systems and accounts management, and here it all is. Talked about EVA a little bit. That's where you go to get your application stuff and all the attachments. Go anywhere we haven't talked about because it's just a simple form to fill out. And that's like our like PII. If you have to send us an email with like a member file or something important, we go through Go Anywhere, and your program officer can get you signed up for that. Criminal history check, TrueScreen FieldPrint, and then the litmus has to be taken every calendar year. eGrants, just a little bit of trainings, and then I mean the trainings go back to like the early 2000s. I mean that's how antiquated the system is. So it's pretty much all the same. And then OnCorps, which is our record keeping and reporting system. So any, useful tools, tricks, does your organization, if you've used these, does one person have access to all of them? I'm just looking for best practices here, share with everybody. Or do you, obviously, please don't say you share accounts. I will die, but does everyone have, do you know who should have access to these accounts? Just thinking about organizationally. Well, I'll leave you with that. Thank you guys so much. If you have any questions, this will be available. And let's see.
I have a quick question, Samantha, if I may. This is Melody. When do we get the base